This is the Comics Alternative Interviews, a conversation with W. Maxwell Prince and Martín Morazzo. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative Interviews. I'm Derek, and on this episode I have the pleasure of talking with W. Maxwell Prince and Martín Morazzo. The first issue of their new series, Ice Cream Man, comes out on Wednesday, January 17th, and I talk with both of those guys about the genesis of their project, what kind of series we can expect, and how they work together. It was quite an informative talk that we had. But before we get to that, I want to let all of you know that this episode of the Comics Alternative Interviews is brought to you by those great folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There, you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts are anywhere from 20 to 35% off of the cover price, and every single month you're going to find some incredible specials. Sometimes those specials could be as much as 45% off of the cover price. Sometimes 50% off cover, but every now and again you can find discounts that go higher than that. And as we have every month at Discount Comic Book Service, you can find incredible deals, such as 50% off, of bundles from such publishers as DC, Marvel, and Valiant. But if you check right now at dcbservice.com, you'll find that you can get issue number 3 of Prince and Morazzo's Ice Cream Man at 40% off of the cover price. So you pay only $2.39, and that's for both cover A as well as cover B. So definitely check out the great folks at Discount Comic Book Service. That's dcbservice.com. They will take care of all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do get your titles there, please be sure to send them an email and tell them that the two guys with PhDs sent you. In December of 2016, Gwen and I had the pleasure of having Will Prince on the Comics Alternative, along with John Amore, to talk about their new work at the time, 1 Week in the Library. Now, I'm glad to see that Will is back with Image and a new series. This one is titled Ice Cream Man, and as the solicit a couple of months ago described, this is a series where we will have a variety of done-in-one stories that could stand alone, but nonetheless, all of the installments or the issues of Ice Cream Man are linked by the title character, this guy who goes around selling ice cream in a small suburban community. And what surrounds him and this community is a series of macabre events. So this is an intriguing idea, and I have a really nice time talking with both Will and Martín about how they came up with the concept and what we can expect in future issues. Now, this isn't the first time that Will and Martín have worked together. Back in 2016, they collaborated on a series for IDW, The Electric Sublime, and that was a wild ride. And they decided to get together again for this new series that's coming out from Image Comics, Ice Cream Man. I had a really nice time talking with both Will and Martín, and I want to share that conversation with you now. I'm pleased to have on the Comics Alternative W. Maxwell Prince and Martín Morazzo. Their new series, Ice Cream Man, begins with issue number 1 this coming Wednesday from Image Comics. Will, Martín, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Hello, thanks.
Yeah.
You know, Will, Gwen and I spoke with you a little more than a year ago with your co-creator of One Week in the Library, Jonna Moore. And I remember in that conversation, we had to bring in your artist from overseas. And we have a somewhat similar situation this time around because, Martin, you're in Buenos Aires, right?
That's correct. Yes, I'm in Buenos Aires in Argentina.
And so, Will, let me ask you, I mean, when you start a new comics project, you consciously look outside of the U.S. for creators?
No, I mean, the nice thing about the age that we're living in is that geography doesn't really mean much anymore in terms of collaborating. So my concern is only with the art and the talent and the person, and luckily, through email and Skype and file sharing and Dropbox, everything else is pretty much, kind of taken care of. So, and unlike Jonna Moore, who lives in the Philippines, which is a little bit harder to travel to and from, I have actually met Martin in person at a comic convention. So Martin and I are not strangers by any stretch of the imagination.
In fact, I was curious how you guys met. Which convention did you guys meet at?
Well, we met first over email. I reached out to Martin about our book at IDW, which was called something different at the time, but it ended up being called The Electric Sublime. Mm-hmm. And I kind of needed a very specific type of artist to collaborate with to kind of bring to life the things that I kind of had in mind for the book, which revolved a lot around fine art and recreations of fine art and expansions of famous pieces of fine art. And Martin, pretty much, I think we within a couple days, him and I kind of understood where each other and what we both wanted from a series like this, and it was really kind of easy to get going. And then eventually we met at the New York Comic Convention.
Because I remember when your title, the two of you worked on together, The Electric Sublime, came out, that was around the same time that One Week in the Library was released. Is that correct? Am I remembering correctly?
Yeah, it was just, I kind of had a lot going on at the time. Yeah, that was a twofer.
Yeah. So now this is a very different series from The Electric Sublime, and maybe a good way of getting into this new series with Image, Ice Cream Man, is to have you guys describe what it is. What's it about? Introduce our listeners to Ice Cream Man.
Sure, I could try first if that's okay, Martin.
Yes, of course. Yeah, you are the man of words.
At least I try to be.
Okay.
Yeah. So, Ice Cream Man is a series comprised of all one shots. So each issue is its own story. Completely different characters, completely different narrative. But the thing that ties all of the issues together is the presence of this Ice Cream Man, who is, not to spoil anything, but very possibly some sort of malevolent, otherworldly being who takes on a variety of forms and practices a variety of kind of mischief. But he is the common element in each of these stories. But the stories themselves, issue 1 is about a young boy who is kind of raising himself. Issue 2 is about a couple of opioid addicts. Issue 3 is about a washed-up musician. So each issue is a showcase for new characters and a kind of new concern in the issue. But they're all kind of held together by the repeated presence of this Ice Cream Man and also this kind of through line, this common tone of a little bit of sadness and suffering and trying to kind of reckon with the world around them, the characters.
Well, Martin, when
Yes.
When Will approached you about this idea, of
Yes.
a series where, for all practical purposes, from what you've described, each issue could stand alone as a single story, kind of like an episode of an ongoing TV series that involved an ice cream man. What was your reaction? I mean, did you go, what? I mean, how can an ice cream man be malevolent?
Yeah. That was my first reaction. But, working with Will before in the Electric Sublime was an amazing experience for me. So, when we got confirmation from IDW that we weren't going to do more issues of the Electric Sublime, it was natural to ask Will, what are we going to do next? So he came up with the idea of the Ice Cream Man, and I instantly loved it. I loved the Twilight Zone or that kind of TV show, so it kind of reminded me of that kind of serial. So I was instantly in.
It's interesting that you mentioned the Twilight Zone, because reading the solicitation of this first issue a couple of months ago, and then after reading this first issue, an early review copy, I immediately thought of television shows like The Twilight Zone, like The Outer Limits, where I guess each issue of the Ice Cream Man is going to be like an episode of something like The Twilight Zone, right? So you're going to have this series of mysteries or macabre stories that could stand alone. The difference, though, between your Ice Cream Man and The Twilight Zone is that there is, I guess, a clearer binding element in the figure of the Ice Cream Man. Now, granted, in The Twilight Zone, you had Rod Serling, right, who was not only the mastermind behind The Twilight Zone, but he was also the narrator. But even as narrator that kind of brought all of the episodes of The Twilight Zone together, it's a little different from your character, the Ice Cream Man, because he's actually a participant in the action of this first issue. And I'm assuming that this will be the case in future issues as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, he, in one way or another, makes an appearance in every single issue as either a very central part of the story or a kind of peripheral part of the story. Yeah,
and there's something really creepy about the Ice Cream Man. And I'm not talking about those scenes where, let's say, Martín illustrates him in such a way that he does look, let's say, rather evil or menacing. But, I mean, the fact that, okay, for example, I'm looking at this first issue, and I don't know, maybe about 19, 18 pages in, there's the scene where the cops in this story, Jalio and Briggs, are going into the McAllister's house, and the television is on, and what's on the television is a commercial by the Ice Cream Man. Now, I don't know of an Ice Cream Man who actually advertises on television. So the fact that he's on the TV right when they come in the house is really damn creepy.
Yeah, it's. I think Martín and Chris did an amazing job of kind of illustrating that sort of dread, and that kind of. It's not even necessarily a dread. It's an unevenness. These two very competent detectives are entering this house where more than one thing is sort of askew, and that voice of the Ice Cream Man, who comes in and at first is just advertising his business, but then his speech and what he's saying starts to take on a different flavor, as it were, as Jalio and Briggs kind of advance through the house. I think that's probably my favorite single scene in the first issue.
Now, this is this going to be an ongoing series, or is it let's say a limited series where you're only going to have anywhere from 5 to 10 issues and then that's it? Or is this open-ended?
Like any sort of Image comic book, it is ongoing until it cannot go on anymore. The way Image works is that these books have to support themselves and make sure that every member of the creative team is keeping their lights on and putting food on their table. Mm-hmm. So right now, the plan is to have it be an ongoing. Each trade is going to be 4 issues. So the first 4 issues comprise kind of the first arc. And then we're going to take a little break and then do another 4 issues. And hopefully, through some critical reception and some people kind of getting out to the stores, we'll be able to, make quite a few chapters of this thing. So
now you mentioned the first arc is going to be made up of the first 4 issues. Now, one of the questions I have is that if each of these issues is kind of a standalone, right? So the story we get in this first issue is very different from what we will see in issue number 2, which is different from what we'll see in the subsequent issue, so on and so forth. Then how are you defining an arc? In other words, what binds, I guess, the first 4 issues, the planned first 4 issues of Ice Cream Man together in such a way that it becomes an arc, in at least the way that we understand it in comics?
There are a couple answers to that. The first is definitely sort of tone and thematics. The first 4 issues are very gloomy. They're pretty dark, and they're very much about kind of suffering and frustration and regret. These sorts of things that we all deal with, but that some of us more than others tend to kind of zoom in on and focus on a little too much. For the sake of my own psyche, I cannot keep that kind of grim tone up. I can't write. The 4th issue is the darkest of all of them, and I think I kind of hit my breaking point there. I was like, I can't write stories like this anymore. I have a daughter. I have a wonderful life. I can't. I'm a complicated guy, but I'm pretty happy most of the time. So I want to inject some hope and some levity into the second arc, and so I use a sort of narrative device at the end of the 4th issue to kind of pivot our way into a new style of storytelling for the second 4 issues.
Oh my God! Well, how dark is issue number 4?
I'm glad to. I have to draw that issue still. So
issue 4 is if I had to guess, if there was an issue where some reviewer was like, "What?" If a reviewer was going to be kind of turned off by the book, I think that's issue 4, because it's just really sort of raw, and it's about parents and about regret and about the decisions you make as a father. And talking to some of the fathers that I know that have made some mistakes in their life, and me being a relatively new father and being very afraid of making certain mistakes. It ends up being just a very quiet but intense issue. But at the same time, I, as a sort of form of therapy, I need to write something with a little bit more light in it. And I'm sure Martín would be happy to draw some things that are not so depressing. So it's just the second arc is going to still be dark, but have just kind of a little bit of light coming through. Whereas in the first 4, that light is snuffed out pretty definitely.
Well, I mean, now granted, the Electric Sublime was a little offbeat, and I guess you could say the same with 1 Week in the Library. Where does this dark tone in Ice Cream Man come from? I mean, is this something, Will, that's hidden inside of you, and it has been this whole time? It's just coming out now?
It's just the way my writing tends to skew. I mean, I have a pretty dark sense of humor, but when you're, as far as my friends tell me, I'm pretty enjoyable to be around. I'm not a bummer. I think in all forms of art, you sort of use it as a kind of therapy to get certain things out of you and to perhaps speak in certain ways or come at things from certain angles that you might not come at through in everyday life. So yeah, it's this way of me sort of trying to deal with certain things and make sense of the world. I'm constantly confused and constantly frustrated, and I think that ends up coming out in a kind of more explicit way in my writing. But if I'm trying very hard to still do those sorts of experiments in terms of turning my frustrations and my concerns into stories, but to also kind of include the other parts of me that are alive, like optimism and hope and a sort of underlying feeling that everything is going to be okay, even when things really seem awful. So that's I'm trying really hard, both for myself and, like I said, for Martín, to make issues 5 through 8 something a little bit more enjoyable to get through. Not that the first 4 aren't enjoyable, but they're
yes,
they're for a certain type of reader.
Okay. Now, Martín, one of the things that struck me about the previous series that you and Will did, The Electric Sublime, is given the subject matter of The Electric Sublime art, it just seemed that it would make sense that an artist could really revel in the subject matter. Now, with this new series, Ice Cream Man, being different in terms of focus, especially quite a bit darker, as Will has been revealing. What are some of the challenges of illustrating this new series? Or maybe another way of asking this question is, in what ways do you feel that the art chores with Ice Cream Man are significantly different from what you did with The Electric Sublime? Or maybe it's not so different.
Yeah, aesthetically, I'm trying to use more darker tones. I'm using more black. If you take a look at the Electric Sublime, it was everything was in color. Mm-hmm. There were not like black masses, big masses.
Yeah, very vibrant.
But I'm trying to focus more on expressions too, on the expressions of the characters. It's a thing I did on the Electric Sublime too, but there is so much dread going on here, so many faces, like extreme expressions. But I wouldn't say it's too different from me. The Electric Sublime was really dark to me too. Probably not in the more macabre way. It's macabre, the word, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, macabre. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But it has its dark too, the thing with the madness of the main character, the thing of the kid who draws things and things happen. It was I don't see it as much as different. What is really different with the Ice Cream Man? It's every issue is a first issue, and that's really different because I have to create characters for each issue, places, and even everything happens on the same town. I have to create different houses and different people and different situations all around. So it's the first time I do one shots, and it's really fun. It's different. It's more fresh, I could say.
Okay, so everything that takes place in this series, Ice Cream Man, does take place in the same location, right? The same town. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, so in other words, we don't have an itinerant Ice Cream Man, right? Going from town to town, kind of like David Jansen's character in The Fugitive, right?
Yeah, no. Well, at least early on, he's kind of chosen this one little suburb. We're not really sure why, but he's having a bit of fun here until perhaps something comes to stop all of his fun.
So with each successive issue of Ice Cream Man, are we going to learn more about, and his name is Rick, correct?
One of his names, yes.
Okay, yes, because at the beginning of this issue, a mother calls him Rick. So this is one of the names he uses. So, I mean, I can just refer to him as the Ice Cream Man. So are we going to learn a little bit more about his background, his personality with each issue?
Yeah, I don't ever think that I will do like an origin of the Ice Cream Man sort of thing, lest I basically pull an it and make him into a giant bug. But we will be learning more about a little bit of his history and what it is that he's after in this town.
I would hope that we don't learn too much about the Ice Cream Man, because otherwise a big part of the mystery, which is, I guess, the driving force behind the narrative, would be diminished.
Yeah, and the other part of that is that as much as though the book is named for him and he plays prominently, or sometimes not so prominently, into each issue, the stories are really about these other people. And that's really the important stuff. This kid and this frustrated detective in the first issue, these different types of drug abusers in the second issue. Those are the kind of, I want those people to be the main attraction, and the Ice Cream Man to be something sort of intriguing on the periphery of everything.
Now, you mentioned the detective, and her name is Jalio Juan. Is she going to be a character that we may see in future issues of Ice Cream Man?
It just so happens you may see her in issue 2 of Ice Cream Man.
Okay.
Albeit very briefly. The idea is that if we have enough room to, do a lot of issues, then you'll see some familiar faces popping up all around.
And the reason I asked, because I had wondered after I read this first issue if we would see some of these same characters, maybe to a much lesser degree or greater degree in future issues. I mean, obviously, the binding element among these various issues, I would assume, is going to be the character Ice Cream Man, where he tells the story, because he is, to a large degree, the narrator here. And he also is the one who is interacting with these various characters' lives. But I was wondering if maybe you're doing something like, let's say, William Faulkner did with Yoknapatawpha County, right? Because there's some of his stories and novels where a character is the main protagonist, and then in another novel, they may be a very minor character that could have something that would, in essence, be something like a walk-on role just for a brief moment, and that's all you'd see. But still, it's kind of a narrative world that he had created here. So I'm wondering if you're doing something similar here with Ice Cream Man.
Yeah, the way...
Comparing yourself to Faulkner, yeah.
I love Faulkner, and I would consider Cormac McCarthy his contemporary. And they both sort of play with that idea where all of their writing is canon to them. In that, that they're creating worlds and telling stories within worlds, and it just so happens that some, one story that you tell might feature, either briefly or more directly these characters from these other stories, but they're all, sort of happening within the same realm, as it were. I really like that idea, and this, part of it is just kind of this way to also ground the reader. Having the one-shot format, I think, could be a little off-putting. I don't know. Plenty of people have done it. I don't know the last time it was done at Image, in their current sort of heyday of really supporting and propping up independent creators and doing really well in terms of the kind of scope of the comics market, competing with the other publishers. So, I don't want to put anyone off by telling one-shot stories, but also these are kind of this is the book I chose to make with Martín and Chris. So it's just a kind of another way to hopefully give readers who aren't used to this sort of format a little bit of comfort and refrain.
Yeah. Now, you've mentioned Chris a couple of times. We should mention that Chris O'Halloran is the colorist, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now,
he's amazing.
Yeah. And what you just said, Will, about the kind of one-shot format, on the one hand, I think that does definitely fit in what you're doing here, at least from what I can sense with Ice Cream Man. And even arguably with what you did a little more than a year ago with John Amore in 1 Week in the Library, right? Because you could take each chapter or section of 1 Week in the Library a week or a weekday, I guess. And in essence, that story could arguably stand on its own, but you combine everything together and you have, let's say, a more novelistic narrative, which leads me to a characteristic that I'm sensing with some of your writing, Will, and that is that you have a tendency to, I guess, privilege in some of your work, what in fiction is called the short story cycle, or what I've called in comics a graphic cycle. In other words, individual stories that could stand on their own, but you take all of those individual stories and you link them in certain ways. For instance, you can link them by the same setting and or the character, or arguably even theme, I guess. And if you put them all together, they have a more whole or novelistic feel to them, right? And you seem to be doing something like that with Ice Cream Man, as you did with 1 Week in the Library. The difference, though, is that you didn't publish 1 Week in the Library as a series of single issues. It came out as a book. Ice Cream Man is coming out every month as a single issue ongoing series. So my question here is, why the decision for the series with Ice Cream Man and not just, let's say, a collection, or if you want to call it a graphic novel, like you did with 1 Week in the Library?
Well, so there are some artistic answers to that and some sort of more boring answers to that. I'll start with the more boring one, is that when I was making 1 Week in the Library, I did not at first intend for it to be published in any way. It was kind of a cool down exercise for me. I had made what was supposed to be a series, then ended up being an OGN with John Amore for IDW called Judas: The Last Days. And the 3 or 4 people that read it seemed to like it. But basically, that was my first attempt at making a comic, and I didn't want those muscles to atrophy or to kind of stiffen up. So I was still in touch with John. I was like, hey, John, do you mind if I just kind of shoot you these short stories and we can just kind of make them to, sort of keep ourselves loose, and, I'll pay you and all this sort of stuff. Then we made the first one, and it was about 8 pages. And I really enjoyed making it. So I was like, hey, why don't we make another one? And that kind of, it wasn't until I made, I think, the 3rd short story that I realized that, I kind of want other people to read these things and to kind of put it out in some way. But because the page counts were all over the place, one chapter was 8 pages, one chapter was 12 pages, another chapter was 30 pages. There was no real way to do it as floppies. So I kind of just realized that it had to be this sort of little graphic novella or whatever. So pitched it to Image as that. But kind of bring it back to the Ice Cream Man. I think I was a lot of where the Ice Cream Man comes from, besides things like the Twilight Zone, which is a huge inspiration on me from when I was a child. My parents were big fans, and they would kind of make me watch it all the time. But the modern show called High Maintenance on HBO started as a web series, and then HBO picked it up. It's about a weed dealer called The Guy, well, it's not really about him, but he appears in each episode and delivers weed to someone, and the episode ends up being about that person that he's delivering to. And it's these kind of compassionate looks at these New York people, that are just buying weed from this one guy. And that kind of, it's like a half-hour show, I think. So that kind of that kind of format where you're telling a complete story seemed to demand more pages. And so the Ice Cream Man just kind of made more sense to put it out as something monthly. A lot of that is for so that hopefully Martín and I can, and Chris too, can all, sort of make a little bit of money from this thing and keep putting it out and have consistent work. But I also just think it, as a narrative, works better to sort of read it, digest it, and then wait a couple weeks and get the next one, kind of like a television format.
And, another benefit to your approach in this series, where each issue is like a standalone story or something like, as I mentioned, like an episode of a TV series, you can enjoy it, you can appreciate it, you can understand it without having to remember what happened in the previous issues. Is that a good thing? Is you don't have to remember what happened in the previous issues, because one of the things I find with monthly comics, but even especially those titles, I guess, that come out, let's say, every other month, or it may even be quarterly, is so much time would have gone by to where I forget, and I read so much, I forget what happened just, let's say, a month ago or maybe 2 months ago. So when the latest issue of a particular series comes out, I often have to go back and reread the previous one or maybe even 2 or 3 issues in order to play catch up in my memory with what's going on with the most recent issue. But you don't have the same demands with Ice Cream Man, because what we'll find in issue number 2 could be linked in some ways with number 1, but it doesn't have to be, right? Readers can pick up number 2 without having read issue number 1, and then issue 3 without the previous ones.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the idea. I kind of wanted in every single solicitation copy to say "jumping on point!" exclamation point. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And then the other part of that is that the book then also doesn't have to play to certain comic book conventions. Making the last page a cliffhanger splash. Even sort of writing for the page turn, which is some writers are more concerned with that than others. Because it's so self-contained, and because it's sort of because each issue is independent from the rest of the series, those sort of constraints aren't applied to the book, which then kind of free me up to have a little bit more fun. I'm not really good with constraints. So it's just kind of another little perk of not doing a kind of straight serial narrative where, each issue has to pick up from the last.
Now, let me ask you guys about your working relationship. Martín, you're in Argentina. Will, you're here in the United States. And, Will, you did mention that given today's technology, it's really no big deal to communicate with a creator halfway around the world or in the Southern Hemisphere. But nonetheless, I would guess that there are certain challenges in living in vastly different areas, different places in the world. So I'm wondering, how you guys work together and what kind of technology you use to communicate and transfer one bit of work to the other.
Mostly emails. We don't usually even do Skype, We just, because English is not my first language. So for me, it's like better to write emails. It's gives me time to look up for probably some terms that I don't know, some vocabulary, and I can probably think better about what I'm about to say. Things that doesn't happen to me here, for example. but it's we think it's a better. I think it's a better way for me at least. But every time we speak with each other, it's like I feel, why don't we do this? Why don't we do this more often? But, maybe we should. I agree. Change that. Yeah.
So you don't communicate much on Skype or FaceTime?
No, never.
Mm. What about via social media? Do you guys tweet out to each other, Facebook stuff? What?
Twitter mostly. Will doesn't have Facebook, so we communicate via Twitter probably. Yeah.
I'm really share bad stuff. At social media.
Yeah, you're like a low profile guy.
What did you say? A what kind of guy?
A low profile.
Okay.
I never got around to making a Facebook, and by the time I finally thought maybe I should do it, it was just seemed way too late. And I guess I've had the Twitter account for a while, but I'm not very good at it. I'm not very active, and I'll forget to read it for 7 or 8 days. And I tend to turn notifications off on my phone. So I'll kind of forget to open it, and then I'll open it up, and there'll be messages and likes and all this sort of stuff. I think I have like under 200 followers. So
yeah, me too. Me too. But it's growing.
Yeah, right. Every
work gives me more followers. So yeah.
In terms of the way I feel about it is that Martín and I are able to communicate very directly through email and kind of say what we mean. Much like kind of Martín joked around about before, I like email because as maybe you've heard in this interview, I can kind of tend to get lost in thought and stammer a little bit when I have to speak. So being able to kind of edit myself and sort of make sure I'm saying exactly what I want to say in as concise a way as possible is really valuable to a person like me. Then beyond that, I feel like, the work just kind of speaks for itself. But I also kind of acknowledge at the same time that we're maybe living in an age where the work can't always just speak for itself, and that we do have to be a little bit more active in the kind of marketing and self-promotion that most people that are in creative fields tend to take part in now. But it doesn't come naturally to me, so it's always just a challenge to be like, I should make a tweet about my book.
Well, you mentioned the kind of marketing that creators do when they have a new work coming out. Let me ask you guys this question. How has your promotion, or at least your planned promotion, for this new series, Ice Cream Man, differed, if at all, from what you did, let's say, a little more than a year ago in getting the word out about the Electric Sublime?
Part of that is really how to the great credit of Image Comics. IDW is wonderful too, but because of Image's sort of stature in the independent comic scene right now in terms of creator-owned stuff, people are a lot more receptive to covering and reviewing books that they put out. This just seems to be the way that the industry is right now. And their marketing team is just really amazing. I work pretty closely with a woman named Bria Skelly, who I believe we're all on an email with. She's just really fantastic at her job and does the full outreach to websites. I think the only difference for me is saying yes more. I can tend to get a little overwhelmed by if all of a sudden there are eight interviews and 4 podcasts on the docket. I also haven't been feeling well lately, so it's just kind of hard to schedule a bunch of stuff in. But I want the book to do well, and I want the book to do well for me, for Martín, for Chris, for Image. So I think you just kind of have to be open to acting outside of your comfort zone a little bit.
You mentioned Bria Skelly. We should say a big thank you to her because she's the one who got all three of us connected and encouraged me to reach out to you guys to do the interview.
Yeah, people, if you talk to a lot of people in the industry, the one thing that they'll say about Image is that, it's since there's no editorial and there's no this or there's no that you're largely on your own. And I've just never found that to be the case. Everyone there is just really kind of helpful and does their job pretty darn well. And Bria especially so. She's, really receptive to emails, really receptive to marketing ideas, to pitching to certain websites that are maybe outside of the norm. She's great. We owe her thanks, and I think the whole team in Image is really pretty fantastic.
Yeah, from my experience, and I'm on Image's reviewer mailing list. I get, and have for quite a while, quite a number of requests from Image Publicity and Bria in particular of doing particular interviews, right? Now, there's some titles that probably don't fall into the comics alternative wheelhouse as well as others, so I don't really pursue those, but there have been quite a number of queries that I've gotten from Bria and others that I followed up on, this being one of those. And so I think that Image is actually quite active in terms of promotion, marketing, and publicity of their titles.
Yeah, active and also sort of discerning. It's not, at least as far as I understand, it's not just these sort of blanket emails. Mm-hmm. They'll think about, which books are right for which outlets. Mm-hmm. Of course, in this industry, there are, probably eight to 10 kind of core sites that, people tend to read and go to kind of try to find new stuff. But it's been my experience that, depending on the subject matter, the publicity team over at Image will kind of think of certain websites that would be, appropriate for your book or this or that. So they're really great. It's always interesting to hear other people talk like, oh yeah, you're so kind of out in the wild if you put out a book at Image, but it's not really true except in the editorial sense, which is a freedom really if you're a certain type of writer. So
yeah, it's interesting that they market the Image publicity team to certain outlets. And what that suggests to me is that they probably consider the comics alternative the gold standard when it comes to comics-related podcasts.
I think it just might be, yeah.
Yes, or at least I tell myself that. Yeah. So now, one of the things I noticed about this first issue of Ice Cream Man, on the title and copyright page, I see what appears to be a subtitle, which is Raspberry Surprise, a flavor of ice cream. Is every issue of Ice Cream Man going to be subtitled, so to speak, by an ice cream flavor?
Something like that, yeah. Issue 2 is called Rainbow Sprinkles.
Okay.
Issue 3 is called Good Old Fashioned Vanilla. And then issue 4 is called something different right now. But it's just a little kind of fun to try to come up with a weird sort of flavor or ice cream accoutrement that kind of ties into the story.
Another thing I noticed about this first issue is the number of times that our main character, or at least the narrator, the Ice Cream Man, says lickety-split. And it also has something to do with, I guess, the mystery behind him, which I don't want to say too much about because I don't want to spoil anything. He does say lickety-split at the very end, but this is something that he says 2 or 3 other times in this issue. Is this going to be kind of an ongoing phrase of his that tells us something about whatever kind of mysterious powers he has?
Not necessarily.
I'm sorry, but I had to Google that. What does it exactly mean? That something comes out fast?
Yes, it's an old-fashioned way to say something will be really fast.
Perfect. I had to Google it. Okay, perfect.
So if you ask someone to make you a hamburger, and they'll be like, "Oh yeah, sure, lickety split."
I will be totally freaked out right now if that happened to me.
Honestly, it's maybe a boring answer, but because of the way that Martín drew the Ice Cream Man and the way that we decided to build him, it seemed to make sense for him to use this kind of more hokey, old-fashioned, circa 50s and 60s language when talking to other people. And I just, for some reason, love that phrase, lickety-split, and it became not only a kind of refrain for him in the story, but then it also actually turns out to be one of his kind of flavors of ice pops in his truck. So it's really just a little bit of fun. But a modern ice cream man wouldn't look like our ice cream man, like a kind of good humor soda jerk from like the 50s or even the 40s. It just seemed kind of appropriate for him to kind of use an outdated phrase to convey that he was doing something really fast. He also does things really fast because he's a weird magical being. So.
Yeah, you mentioned that lickety-split is kind of an older expression, right? It's something that maybe our parents or grandparents would be more apt to use than we would. And I think that adds to the creepy factor with the Ice Cream Man, that he says this several times. And as you point out, there's a kind of popsicle brand called lickety-split. But it's not something that people say often, which again kind of adds to the macabre nature of this title.
Yeah, everything, with the Ice Cream Man is supposed to be just a little left of center or very left of center. So it's just kind of another way to, kind of give that idea of this unnerving, unsettling thing inside of us, a kind of voice.
Well, you've told us a little about what may be going on or what to expect in the next one or two issues of Ice Cream Man. I mean, how much more can you tell us without giving too much away? In other words, what can we expect with, let's say, Ice Cream Man 2 next month and the following month, the third issue?
Sure. Well, Ice Cream Man 2, they've both been solicited, so there's a little bit of information out there. Ice Cream Man 2 is about opioid addiction. Mm-hmm. It's written it's like my version of a Dennis Johnson short story. Dennis Johnson is my favorite author. He died last year. He wrote the kind of incomparable book of short stories, which is kind of like Ice Cream Man, called Jesus' Son. He actually has his last posthumous book of short stories coming out tomorrow called Largesse of the Sea Maiden. It's written in a different voice than anything I've ever done before. I'm really, really proud of issue 2. I think if people were going to say wow at one of our issues, it would be that one. But then issue 3, which Martín has just finished inking, is its own sort of weird, has its own sort of weird wow factor. It's a musical issue about a washed-up musician after the mold of Bill Haley and the Comets. Really? Who has an incredibly tragic, not incredibly tragic, but a pretty tragic story about the end of his life and the way that he kind of spent his later years. There was an article written about him in, I think it was The Texan. And there was just this one element of the article where Bill Haley, toward the end of his life, would sit in a diner and whistle Rock Around the Clock, in the hopes that other people in the diner would recognize who he was.
Really?
Which was just so sad. So sad to me.
Yeah, it is sad.
And so I just couldn't kind of shake that image from my head, and so kind of decided to make a story about a character like that in this town, who kind of gets a second chance at stardom through some of the Ice Cream Man's weird little magic. So that's kind of a little taste of what's to come in the subsequent issues.
Well, Martín, what can you tell us about the art in upcoming issues? Now, you mentioned that you haven't yet started to work on issue number 4, this aforementioned really dark issue.
Yes. I know what it is about, but I haven't started working on it yet. It will be this week anyway. So yeah, up to now, it's I don't know. Each issue has been totally different. Of course, my style is the same, and I don't know, the narrative approach. It's the same too, but this one, for example, it has a lot of action. Probably the first issue doesn't have as much as action, and the second one, well, it has its moments too, but. The thing of the different characters on each issue, it's really refreshing for me. It's a totally different world.
Well, and maybe this is a little premature for me to ask, but you guys have worked together previously on the Electric Sublime. You're in the throes of this first narrative arc with Ice Cream Man. Have you two in any ways discussed another possible future project together?
We haven't yet, I don't think, but hopefully, if Ice Cream Man gets to go for a while and we get to sort of continue to do this together, then if it doesn't, go longer than 8 issues or 12 issues, then we'll find something else to do. That's assuming that Martín isn't
definitely
too famous definitely by that point.
No, or you.
Okay, is there any other project that either of you may be working on, not with the other, but besides Ice Cream Man currently?
I cannot speak for Martín, although I kind of know his workload right now. I was working on some other stuff and then realized that I can't really do anything but the one book right now. I have a full-time job, and it's just impossible to write multiple books and a 1-year-old daughter kind of in the spaces between breaths. So I do kind of have some other stuff going on, but it's all kind of on hold so we could focus on Ice Cream Man and make it as powerful of a release as possible. What
about you, Martín? Illustrating anything else?
Yes, I'm working on a miniseries with another editorial, but it hasn't been announced yet. It's a new story for Berger Books.
Oh, really? So it's one of Karen Berger's imprints, a new title for the Berger Books.
Yes,
but it hasn't been announced at all yet.
Yes, it will be announced in March, I think. So,
okay, so you really can't say anything about it now.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, we're going to be interviewing Karen Berger in the next couple of days.
Oh, that's amazing.
About Berger.
Don't tell her I said anything,
No, but I will ask her about maybe future Berger book titles.
Okay.
And maybe she'll spill the beans.
Yeah,
you can tell her we both said hello. She's been very kind to both Martín and myself, because I think she's just a kind person in general.
Okay, I will. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that conversation. Martín, Will, I want to thank you guys for coming on the Comics Alternative and talking about your new series, Ice Cream Man, in particular, issue number 1, Raspberry Surprise.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Derek.
There you have it, my conversation with W. Maxwell Prince and Martín Morazzo. I want to thank both of them for coming on the Comics Alternative and talking about their new series, Ice Cream Man. It's something that I'm really looking forward to see how this series develops. And as I pointed out at the top of the show, you can right now pre-order issue number 3 of Ice Cream Man and get a great discount by doing so by going to the website of our sponsor, which is Discount Comic Book Service. Go to dcbservice.com. Remember, they will take care of all of your comics pre-ordering needs, and you cannot beat their prices. And after you do get your titles there, please be sure to get in touch with me and let me know what you thought about my conversation with Martín and Will. If you go to our website, comicsalternative.com, you'll find that you can leave me a voice message online via SpeakPipe. Or you can call me the old-fashioned way by picking up the phone and dialing 4153-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427. You can also email us. We're 2guys@comicsalternative.com, or you can email me directly. I'm Derek at comicsalternative.com. You can also find us all over social media, such as on Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Goodreads, Pinterest, YouTube, and we have our own Slack channel. You can subscribe to the podcast through Apple Podcast. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can also find us on TuneIn, on Spotify, on iHeartRadio, and on Google Play Music. But you can find every single one of our podcast episodes, as well as the reviews and comics-related commentary that we post on our blog, simply by going to our website, which is comicsalternative.com. We've got more interviews lined up in the weeks to come, so please be sure to check back for those. Until then, I'm Derek, and I'll be podcasting at you later.